Welcome back to the App Maker for Jira tutorial series. In this video, we are going to be going over a feature called data lists. Data lists are probably the last really large capability inside App Maker for Jira that need to be covered as part of these tutorials. And they are probably, when combined with Webhook transforms, really the most powerful capability that App Maker has, and they are what allow you to create fully featured custom applications with App Maker in a way that you really can't do with most other low-code tools or low-code app builders for any product, let alone just Atlassian products. What data lists allow you to do is store and manage not just a single object of data, like you can with the data object, but a whole list of objects of data. So multiple instances of a type of data, where each of those items in the list has a similar shape. When I say similar shape, the structure of the object is roughly the same. Now, to give you a real world example of where you would want to use that, let's say you have a CRM system which has a list of all of your customers and all the information about those customers, but then you also have Jira Service Management for managing, say, service tickets. Now, when a Jira Service Management ticket comes in, you want to show your service agents a list of all the open deals from your CRM system related to that particular customer on the Jira Service Management ticket, so that the agent has that context and can see all those details about the customer from the CRM. But you want to be able to do that without giving the agents full access to the CRM system itself, because those licenses may be very expensive, and things like Salesforce, which are thousands of dollars a license sometimes, or you just might not want to give your agents that level of access. You might want to be able to just give them a short summary of each deal, like maybe the value of the deal or who the account manager for the deal is, or things like that. To do that, you can use data lists, because you can store each deal, like the data for each deal, as an item in the list, or a subset of the data for each deal in an item in the list, the subset which you want to expose. And then you can use AppMaker's UI components to then render each item in that list in the UI as something like a table, in order to show your agents, what deals maybe are available from the CRM system. Now, obviously, that's just one example. Other examples are, you might want to have, if you're a software team, you might want to show in Jira a list of all the open pull requests for any GitHub repos that are related to that Jira project. And you might want to have their statuses listed there, who the author is, what the status is, and then you want them to go away once they're closed. You only want to show the open ones, and that way people can keep track of open pull requests they need to review more easily, things like that. Anything where you need to sort of manage a list of external data and show it somewhere in AppMaker, that's what data lists are for. And this ability to work with lists of data is really where most other low-code, no-code, AppMaker type solutions in the entire market for any tool fall over. This is what they can't handle. They just don't have the capability to do this kind of work. And it's really, really important if you think about how often when you're working with tools, every single tool, like software tool, you're either looking at a single large object, a data object. So to give you an example, if I go into Jira, this is not looking at our tool, this is just looking at Jira. You're either looking at an issue, a single issue, which would be a single object of data, or you're looking at a list of things. So here you have a list of issues, and this would be, 3 different issue objects. So the key thing to understand is, once you have the ability to store objects of data, and then once you have the ability to store lists of objects of data, you have everything you need to build a fully featured app. You sort of have everything you need to build, say, Jira, obviously, a very basic version. is there. You can store these lists, you can open them up, you can look at the details in the object. Great, you can do everything. So data lists are very important because they what allow you to create this kind of view. And this kind of view is really important when you're trying to share context with a piece of software. So in terms of working with data lists, they actually feel a lot like working with data objects. The main difference with a data list is that you're using a different set of action keywords. So where with a data object, you might have had an action that was something like set. With a data list, you would use an action like add or remove rather than set or delete. And the idea there is that you're adding or removing an item from the list. You're not deleting or creating the list itself. You're adding or removing the item from the list itself. And we'll go over that in more detail when we go through the worked example, which we're going to go through right now. The only other difference between data objects and data lists is a top-level property called a list item key. And what the list item key does is it tells AppMaker which of the properties in the data list item itself, the object in the data list, represents the unique identifier for that object. So every item in a list must have a unique identifier property. And that is used so that the system can look up those items and work with them. So we'll show you exactly what that means in a little bit. To go through this worked example, you're going to need access to a HTTP or API client like HTTP or Postman, and you're going to need access to your Jira, the admin access to your Jira site. All right, so we're going to work through that example that I mentioned before. It's obviously, we're going to work through a basic version of it. We're going to kind of pretend to be the CRM system sending deal data. And we're not going to attach it to a JSM ticket. We're just going to attach it to the screen in Jira. But it'll show you how to work with this concept. I'm not going to work through in detail creating the actual CRM deal dashboard UI component because we've already covered how to make UI components. And that would take quite a while to go through this because it is quite a complex component. Just know that the JSON for this component is available in our documentation. Go to guides and then data lists, and the full JSON for making this component is available there. The other thing to note is that this UI component uses a new, like a pre-built template component at the UI component type that we haven't gone over yet, which is called a dynamic table. And that is what allows you to work with lists. We will go over dynamic tables in detail in the next video. For now, if you're following along, just grab the CRM deals table component JSON from the documentation and paste it into a UI component like I'm doing here. And don't think too much about that. That's not what this video is about. This video is about data lists. We'll go through the actual table itself in the next video so you understand exactly how it works. I'm going to go new, go delete what's there. I'm going to paste in the JSON from the documentation. You can see here, it's not hugely complex, but it is a little bit complex. And you'll see here the example table it's created. You can see, all right, cool. It's a CRM deals dashboard. This table displays all the open deals in our CRM instance. And then you can see here the table component is self-rendered with no data in it. It's great. One last thing that is included in here, which we're not going to go over yet, we'll go over this in a future video, is that there is this table rows property in the dynamic table UI component. And it's templating some values in here, but you'll see here it looks a bit different. You'll see here there's a word list and then a colon and then this path, which probably looks familiar. Data list stop site.crm deals. Now, you can probably figure out that this, similar to mapping to a data object or mapping to a Jira field, is basically a namespace, which is data lists, and then it's a site scoped list, and the list is called CRM deals. Now, this is something that you would not have seen yet, which is what we call a template function. And this is basically telling AppMaker that we want to, whatever you're passing in here, whatever this is, we want you to do something with it, or we want you to know something about it. And in this context, we're saying that this is a list. So it's like list, colon, and then a path to the list. And that just tells AppMaker that it needs to treat this data in a special way. You don't really need to know what it's doing, but just know that if you're ever passing a list of data into a UI component and you want it to know that it's a list and work as if it's a list, you need to have this list colon in front of it, which is a template function. We'll be going over template functions in detail in future videos. Just know that they exist, and they basically are a way of applying sort of a modifier to something that you are templating in, and it's telling our system to sort of make some changes to that data or treat that data in a special way. In this case, treating it as a list, and it will do some special things to that data. For those of you who are interested and maybe are a bit more advanced in technical knowledge, what we're doing here is we're telling it to, rather than have this list inside these double quotes, it will actually hydrate this list up to a full JSON array and replace this entire section here with that full JSON array, so that it removes quotes and does not treat it as a string. It treats it as an actual structured data list, which can then be passed into the table. If you don't know what any of that means, don't worry, you don't really need to. All right, so we've got our CRM table. I'm going to hit save. That creates the UI component. Now, this, you see here, this is a module called a Jira global page. And we haven't talked about this module yet. This is the details of this module are available in our documentation. What this does is it creates a page up here in the top nav menu of Jira. You got apps, you got custom apps. This is the global page section. So this is where the deals will be listed. You could also create this as like a project page. So if I went to AMT, you see that we have this custom apps section there. You could create it as a page here if you wanted to have it scoped to a particular project. For the sake of the example, though, we're just going to do it at the global level, which means that it will be on this page here. All right, then. So we've got our UI component created. That's great. Now we need to add some data into this data list. Now, if you were doing this like in real life with an actual external system, you would probably need to implement a two-step process here. One, you would have a webhook transform, which is set up to receive webhooks from, say, your CRM system whenever details of a deal changes. And what you would do is you would have that webhook transform, get the webhook, transform the data, and then that webhook transform would then execute an action against the data list. And so if you remember from the previous video, webhook transforms had a transform target, which was either data list or data object. You would make that data list, and then that webhook transform would basically update items in the list every time the webhook is received from the external system. So what we're going to do right now, though, is we're just going to create a item in the list by hand directly using our API client and making an API request directly to the data lists endpoint. We're not going to go via webhook transform, so we're going to create the item in a shape that is already compatible with AppMaker. So I'm going to open up our API client. I'm going to remove this old one. I'm going to create a new one. It's going to be a post request because I've got to send some data. Now I need to know the URL. So I'm going to go back to here. I'm going to go back to the app settings. And I'm going to go to our APIs tab. And then down here we have data lists, and we want to update the data list. So we're going to grab that, copy that URL back to here. We're going to drop that in there. Great. So updating data lists. All right. And then I'm going to grab the actual payload. Again, this is just being pulled from our documentation. So jump onto our documentation, the data list guide to get this yourself, and you can access all this JSON easily rather than having to copy it at the screen. Great. All right, let's walk through this before we do anything else. So we're working with the data list update endpoint. The action is add. So we're saying we want to add a list item to the list. The other option for actions is remove. If you want to remove an item from the list, you would change the action to remove. Next up, we give it the information about the list itself. So the resource type is site. So this is a data list, which is scoped to the site level. You can scope data list to the project level, just like data objects. That's fine. But for now, we're scoping it to the site level. The title of the list is CRM deals. And we referenced that in our dynamic table that we were using before. Lastly, we have this new property, which is one we haven't seen before. List item key. What this is saying, this is basically telling AppMaker which property inside the list item represents the unique identifier for the item itself. Now, this is really important because this is how we allow AppMaker to do a lot of the complicated work for you. Now, if you are building this as an actual app, one of the most complicated things when working with this data is, well, what do I do if that item is already in the list? How do I prevent duplicates? How do I update an existing version versus creating a new version? How do I know which one to delete when I want to delete something? The way that is all handled is that's all handled automatically for you with AppMaker. You don't need to think about any of that kind of stuff. We do all that for you. And the way we do that for you is by simply having you specify this list item key. So in this context, the list item key is ID, which is this property here. Now, a few things you need to know. Every list item you send to this list must include an ID if you specified ID here. Now, this could be anything. This could be key, it could be name, it could be, social security number if you want it to be. And whatever the name of this field is, you would have that there. So if this said name, you would have the list item key as name. If this was key, you would have the list item key as key. The value of this is the unique identifier for the object. So you have two objects in the list, one with an ID of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and one with an ID of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. They are unique objects, and the system will treat them as unique objects. If I create this now, like a send, outcome list item added, great. So we know that worked. So what I'm going to do is show you a few things. So beside, I'm going to go back to here. I'm going to go back to apps. I'm going to go to our dashboard. Great. First thing here, that table now has some information in it. So this is that item we just created. We have the title, big deal with important customer. We have the owner, which is just a person, and we have a status. We'll go through how to create these tables in the next video. You can do all kinds of cool stuff. You can create these little conditional lozenges with different colors. You can create, obviously with text in here. The text can also have a link. So this just goes to google.com right now. And you can see that all of this information was actually contained in the list item. So the link was google.com. The status is open. The owner is John Doe. The title is blah. All right. So we've shown you how to create the actual item in the list now. Now we need to work with that list. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a second deal to the list before we do anything else. So I'm going to grab the data for the second deal. Grab it here. Going to drop that in there. And we're going to send that. Call list item added. Now notice that the ID is 54321. Whereas before, the ID was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that's how we say that these are different items in the list. So if I go back to here and I refresh the page, 2 items in the list now. One is closed, owner Jane Doe, small deal of unimportant customer, big deal of important customer. Great. Both those items are now in the list as separate items. And that's the key thing. All right. So we've added both items to the list. We've got both of our deals in here. But let's say that big deal with important customer has now closed. So we want to change the status of big deal with important customer. Let's go back here. Let's just change that back. So now we're back to here. This is the object we use to create big deal with important customer. All right. We need to update this item now to say status closed. So I can just go say status closed. And the really important thing, the thing you really need to focus on and need to sort of like get into your head for this part is that the ID is the same. We're not changing the action. We don't need to create an update action or anything like that. We just need to add. The ID is the same. What AppMaker does when you execute an add action, it goes to the list and it grabs the ID that you specify with the list item key, and it looks through the list to see, is there already an item in this list with that same ID? If there is not, then the add action will add that item to the list. If there is already an item with the same ID, then we assume the add action is actually an update action. But that means you don't have to think about it. You don't have to know if you're updating or adding because you're not going to know that. You're not going to know if webhooks come through, you're not going to know if there's already one in there or not. And so you're not going to know if you need to use an add or an update action. So we do that for you. So the key thing is when you're updating an item, you just need to make sure that the ID is the same as it was before, and it will update it. You also need to make sure that you specify all of the fields. You don't just specify the field you want to update. Because what we'll be doing is we'll overwrite whatever this item, that ID is, with the new values. And so if you only say updated closed, and you didn't include title, owner, or link, that row would basically be empty other than just the closed status because it would be an empty object. So if I'm now going to go and send that. Cool. List item added. I go back to here. I refresh the page. And you see here, cool. Big deal with important customer is now closed, but everything else is still there. So now we've updated that item in the list rather than creating it. All right, great. So you know how to add an item to a list. You know how to update an item in the list. The last thing you need to know is how to remove an item from a list. And this is, you could probably tell, this is going to be pretty simple. Go back to HTTP. We're going to update the action to remove. Now, useful thing to know, you can include all of the data in here, but you don't need to. All you need to include with a remove action is whichever property is the unique identifier. So in this context, we just include ID. I could include all that data if I wanted to. It's fine. It's not going to cause a problem. It's just going to ignore it. But you only need to include the unique identifier. So this should now, if I execute this, it should remove the big deal. So this item removed. I go back to the custom app, refresh the page. Boom, big deal is now removed. And just for the sake of completeness, let's go back here and we'll make this 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 and send. Also, just an interesting little note, this is a number. So if it's a number, it doesn't have quotations around it. Just be aware of that. JSON can support numbers and they don't need to have quotations around it. They're perfectly valid. Up to here and refresh. And the table is now empty because we have removed both of those deals. Great. That's it. So you've now added items to a list. You've learned how to update those items in the list. And you've learned how to remove those items from a list. Now, importantly, remember back to the webhook transforms, where webhook transforms could have a transform target, and that target could be a data list. Combining webhooks, webhook transforms, and data lists is how you build extremely powerful, dynamic things like dashboards and stuff like that in AppMaker. To give you an example, let's say you have a webhook which is sent whenever a deal is created or updated, and you have a different webhook which is sent whenever a deal is deleted or removed or closed. You would have separate webhooks for each of those, separate webhook transforms for each of those webhooks. We'd be listening for those different webhooks and would be either adding items to a list when a deal is created or updated, or you would be removing items from the list whenever the deal is closed. Alternatively, if your CRM doesn't support separate webhooks for created and updated versus closed, if closed is just considered to be an update event, what you would do is you would use the conditions feature that we mentioned before, and you would have one webhook transform which executes only when the status of the deal is, open or pending or whatever else status you want, and another webhook transform which only executes when the status of the deal is closed. And when I said status of the deal, I'm talking about in the webhook body coming from your CRM. The one that is conditioned on the open or pending status would be the one that adds items to the list. And the one that is conditioned on the closed or maybe lost status in the webhook payload is the one that removes the item from the list. We have a fully worked example on our documentation along with a video that goes through exactly this scenario of creating multiple webhooks, multiple transforms to kind of create a full closed loop system where you have a dashboard which shows things that are open and updates in real time. We're not going to go over that in this video. It's way too much detail, but just know that in the example section in our documentation, we do have that worked through as a full example. And we will be creating several of those examples using different systems, like different CRMs, different tools, and webhooks, so that you can sort of understand different examples of how those kinds of things work, because this is probably one of the most powerful capabilities in AppMaker is the ability to have these lists which are dynamically updated in real time based on information from a third-party system. All right, next up, the next video is going to be going over dynamic tables, which is the UI component that we use for this dashboard. We'll be showing you how those work in more detail and how to use all of the capabilities of those. They are one of the more powerful UI components, but also one of the more complex UI components. So hang around and stay tuned for the next video.